November 3rd, 1945. Infirmary, U.S. Army Camp, San Joaquin Valley, California. The room hummed with a generator's soft drone and smelled faintly of carbolic and dusted canvas. Yuki Nakamura sat on the wooden stool, palms damp, eyes narrowed against the lamp that clicked alive in Captain Avery Reed's hand. The Snellen chart waited on the far wall. EFP, like blocky gates in a fog. A posted rule above the door read, "Medical area. No shouting, no weapons beyond this point." A nurse swabbed metal wire frames, a small ritual of no harm, alcohol winking on the cloth. When the light flared, the younger woman beside Yuki flinched. Yuki lifted her hand, a quick shield, and felt the heat of the bulb on her knuckles. "Easy," Captain Reed said, his voice even. "You're safe. This won't hurt." He dialed the pupil lamp lower. "Try the third line, Miss Nakamura." Yuki swallowed. The letters sharpened, edges cutting through years of blur. She tasted tin in her mouth, felt the rough seam of the stool, the sudden outline of the captain's brass. A world came into focus. If stories like this matter to you, please subscribe and tell us which country you're watching from. 6 weeks earlier, Central California Camp, reception yard. Steam rose off the wash kettles and slid along the rafters, sweet with soap and the faint mineral bite of well water. Yuki Nakamura worked her hands through a rope of damp sheets, feeling the weave as if touch could replace sight. Someone hissed her name. At the edge of the shed, a notice flapped on the bulletin board, tacked by a bent nail. The mimeograph ink had bled a little, but she knew the shape at its top, a blocky E from the Snellen chart, like a gate in fog. "Trick," Sumi whispered, wringing out a pillowcase. "They will tag whoever wants extra." A sentry strolled past the doorway, boots clicking. When a woman asked about timing, he didn't slow. "Not today." His tone left nothing to grip. Yuki kept folding. She had learned to accept blur the way one accepts weather, but lately the letters in her friend's last postcard had puddled into guesses. She wanted the edges back, of ink, of thread, of her own name. Beyond the yard fence, the infirmary sat white and square as a sugar cube. Through the open transom she caught a glimpse, a towel laid out, metal wire frames drying on it like small sleeping birds. "What if they laugh?" Sumi said. "What if you were seen as—" She didn't finish. On the mess hall wall, a second copy of the notice hung near a hand-painted rule. No fraternization. Medical only. Below the Snellen chart, the words were simple. Exams available. Lenses by measurement. The paper smelled of solvent and dust. Yuki read the first line twice, then a third time, to be certain she wasn't inventing it. Obligation, the camp doctor had said at a roll call last week. Care as obligation, not favor. The word still felt foreign in her mouth. Sumi tugged her sleeve. "If you want it, go." Yuki stepped forward, palms damp. The pencil on the string was dull. She pressed harder until the wood creaked. On the last line, where names wavered like reeds, she wrote, "Nakamura, Yuki." The letters came out uneven, but they held. Outside, a breeze lifted the notice and dropped it again with a papery sigh. From the infirmary window, the towel flashed once more, those wire frames catching light. Yuki touched the printed E with 2 fingers, solid, even if blurred, and let go. She returned to the laundry line, the sheets bright as flags in the late sun, and worked in silence. If anyone asked later, she would say only that she had read the paper. She had not begged. She had signed. They lined up along the chalked stripe outside the infirmary, shadows neat as broomstrokes. The building's fan purred, drawing out a scent of carbolic that met the warmer smells of burlap sacks and machine oil from the work shed. Yuki kept her eyes on the gravel. When she lifted them, she caught a sliver of the doorway. The Snellen chart on the far wall, the big E like a gate left ajar. A civilian contractor in a sun-faded hat paused with a crate on his hip. "Lenses for captives," he said to the guard, not quite quietly. "What next? Silk stockings?" The guard answered with a shrug that meant nothing and everything. On the jam, black letters warned, "No fraternization, medical only." Yuki's name, called badly, Nakamura, jerked her forward. She kept her hands folded, making herself small. The guard raised a palm to halt her as the contractor edged closer, listening. A thin silence gathered, the kind that could tilt toward refusal. Captain Reed stepped into the frame. He wore tiredness like a second collar, but his voice held. "Next patient," he said, eyes on Yuki. "Clinic by policy. Let her through." He did not look at the contractor when he spoke. He did not have to. Inside, the air cooled a degree. A nurse nodded toward a bench and wiped a pair of wire frames with a square of gauze, the alcohol bloom sharp and clean. Behind a canvas screen, the pupil lamp burned its small sun, turned low. "Name?" the nurse asked. "Nakamura Yuki." The nurse found her on a card stack, penciled a time, and pressed the card into Yuki's palm. "Pretest now. Full refraction tomorrow." Yuki read the card's letters, clear enough to sting, then glanced past the screen. The Snellen chart waited in its quiet geometry. She felt the contractor's words like grit under a lid, but set them aside. The rule on the door had not moved. The captain's tone had not wavered. Obligation, not favor. The phrase sounded less foreign when attached to a time, tomorrow, 0900, and a small, practical thing like a card. "Cover your left eye," the nurse said, handing her the occluder. The lamp brightened a fraction. Yuki breathed in, tasted metal and paper, and named the letters she could not name a month ago. Some still swam, but fewer. When she left, the sun struck the tray, and the wire frames flashed like a quick nod. She stepped back into the yard. The line had shortened. The contractor was gone. The guard stared at nothing. Yuki slipped the card into her pocket and stood a little taller. The bench had a shallow wobble, one leg shaved thin to meet the warped floor. Yuki set her heels together to still it and folded the appointment card in her palm until the crease bit. A wall clock ticked above the doorway. Tick, pause, tick, as if measuring courage by seconds. Through the half-open screen, she could see the pupil lamp, its little sun turned low, and the Snellen chart beyond it, black letters marching toward certainty. Sumi slid down beside her, breath a little fast from morning drill. "Once you wear them, everyone will know," she murmured. "Some will say you asked for more than your share." Yuki kept her gaze on the floorboards. The grain had its own rivered map. Even blurred, it looked like travel. "I am only asking to see," she said. A guard passed, slowing just enough to read the card in her fist. His eyes lifted to the sign, "No fraternization, medical only." He lingered at nothing and moved on. From the yard, someone said the Red Cross might come next week. The rumor made the clinic's edges sharper, the trays neater, the nurses' voices quieter. The door opened and shut, a soft thump. A nurse crossed to a side table and dipped a square of gauze into alcohol, polishing wire frames one by one. The scent rose clean and quick, like lightning before rain. Yuki's eyes watered reflexively. She blinked, and the chart on the far wall wavered, then steadied. "Glasses mark you," Sumi said, softer now, "as if we are grateful." Yuki felt the words rest on her shoulder like a hand that did not push. Gratitude, debt, pride. Each had teeth. She imagined the postcard waiting in her bunk, the way the ink thinned at the loops of her mother's name. Sight was not celebration. Sight was a tool, like a needle or a broom. Tools did not ask who you were. They asked what you meant to do. Inside the screen, someone read letters, halting, then smoother. The pupil lamp brightened a fraction. The Snellen chart kept its quiet gait. Yuki breathed with the clock. Tick, pause, tick. She pictured writing a line, steady, legible, without guessing at the distance between strokes. "Miss Nakamura," the nurse called, appearing with a clipboard. Yuki stood. The wobble of the bench remained behind her. She smoothed the appointment card once, pressed it flat, and stepped toward the light. The canvas screen sighed as the nurse drew it closed, softening the clinic's hum into a small, careful world. Yuki sat on the wooden stool, knees together, palms on her skirt to keep them from fidgeting. The Snellen chart hung beyond the examiner's shoulder, the big E holding its gate. Captain Reed adjusted the pupil lamp until a warm coin of light rested just off her face. "We'll go slow," he said. "Look here." His finger tapped a spot beside the lamp. Not her eyes. The lamp brightened a notch. Behind Yuki, the door hinges ticked, and another patient was led to the neighboring chair. A younger girl inhaled too sharply. When the lamp in that booth clicked on, she flinched and raised an elbow to her brow like a shield. The room tightened. Boots shifted. The clock paused between ticks. Yuki lifted her hand without thinking, palm tilted to catch the extra spill from her own pupil lamp, making a small shade for the girl across the screen. Heat pressed into her knuckles. A white crescent floated in her vision and then cleared. "Thank you," the girl whispered in Japanese, almost air. Captain Reed's tone eased. "We can dim if needed." The nurse dialed the rheostat down a breath. "Better?" Yuki nodded. He moved the occluder toward her left eye. "Cover this one. Read what you can." The Snellen chart steadied. "E, F, P," she said, careful, tasting each letter like a bead between the teeth. "T, O, Z." The edges were not crisp, but they were no longer guesses. "Switch," he said. The occluder cooled her cheek as it slid to the other side. The lamp warmed again. A deliberate, gentler sun. Footsteps in the corridor faded. Alcohol bloomed as the nurse polished wire frames on a tray, metal ringing faintly like coins. Third line, Ella P. E. No, I'm wrong. D. Her throat tightened. She corrected herself and kept going. "Good," Reed said, and the word rested in the room like a weight removed. He noted figures with a stub pencil, the paper rasping softly. "You're doing fine." When he finished the pupil check, he snapped the lamp off. Darkness pooled, then righted itself. The Snellen chart waited, calm as print on a page. "We'll refract next," he said. "Take a minute." Yuki lowered her hand, feeling the echo of heat fade from her skin. The girl behind the screen exhaled, steady now. Outside, someone laughed in the yard, and the sound arrived thin and ordinary. Yuki smoothed the hem of her skirt, found her breath, and faced the chart again. First light had not blinded her. It had made a place to stand. Captain Reed lowered the pupil lamp to a soft coin and swung a metal frame into place before Yuki's eyes. The room narrowed to lenses and breath. Beyond the screen, boots clattered, a clipboard snapped shut, and a guard's voice suggested speed, almost polite, not quite. "We'll try a few," Reed said. "Tell me which is clearer, 1 or 2. The first pair thickened the black strokes of the Snellen chart until they bled at the edges. 2, she said, though it felt like choosing fog over thicker fog. "Good. Now, 3 or 4. Alcohol rose again as the nurse polished wireframes on the tray. Yuki tasted it on the back of her tongue. 3 pinched the world. 4 loosened it and let a little light through. 4, pencil rasped on paper. Outside, someone laughed, cut it short. Reed did not look up. Again, 1 or 2. 1 sharpened the top of each letter and blurred the feet. 2 did the opposite. Her shoulders tightened. She imagined these numbers becoming the shape of her days. Headaches returning to clock her hours. Ink sliding into pools when she tried to write. She exhaled. 2. Good, he said, steady as a metronome. Nearly there. He slid another lens into place. The pupil lamp warmed a fraction, and the white of the chart lifted like linen on a line. The third combination arrived without warning. The letters snapped from mist to bone. She saw the tiny burr at the bottom of a P, the fine crack in the paint of the E's lower arm, the hairline shadow where the chart curled from the nail. Yuki laughed, brief and startled. The sound embarrassed her, and then did not. This one, she said, as if admitting relief could be a fault. Reed's mouth moved, almost a smile, not quite. Hold that. Look at the next line. She read without guessing. T-O-Z-L-P-E. The letters stood where they were put and did not sway. The pencil wrote again. Paper scratched. The corridor quieted. Yuki felt the weight of her own face lighten, as if the frame were already there and had taken something heavy with it. The Snellen chart no longer dared her. It invited her to name what existed. Reed stepped back, satisfied. That's the measure. We'll cut lenses accordingly. On the tray, the wire frames flashed once, modest as small coins. The guard's voice drifted and went thin. Yuki blinked, and the world held. Tomorrow, the nurse said, tapping the card, you'll fit them. Yuki nodded. Tomorrow had edges now. Sunday settled over the camp like a lowered hand. The chapel tent released a hymn that drifted across the gravel, soft as steam. Yuki stood under the infirmary eave with a few others, appointment cards tucked into palms. The door was closed while the nurse finished the hour's fittings. Beside the steps, someone had pinned a broadsheet to the notice board. Ink bled at the folds. The headline bit, "Lavish services for enemy prisoners." A man in a contractor's cap read it aloud to the guard, savoring each word. "Glasses," he said. "Today it is glasses." He turned a little, enough for the waiting line to hear. "Tomorrow what? Velvet pillows?" No one answered. The chapel cord tugged once more at the air and thinned. Yuki smelled newsprint, iron and dust, and the faint alcohol that seeped from the door frame each time it opened. She pressed her thumb along the edge of her card until the paper dented. The pupil lamp inside shone a steady coin through the frosted pane. The Snellen chart lived somewhere beyond it. Holding its hard alphabet, the door opened. Captain Reed stepped out with a sheet in his hand. He read for a moment, then taped his own notice beside the editorial. The paper lay flat, no drama, the tone administrative. Clinic continues under standing medical obligations. Appointments proceed as scheduled. Non-fraternization rules remain in effect. His pencil ticked the margin with the day's date. The contractor's mouth worked. "You mean to keep by policy," Reed said, not looking up. He held the door for the next patient, as if that settled the weather. The guard studied the two papers, a bruise-colored headline and a plain block of type that did not raise its voice. He shifted his weight and said nothing. The hymn faded to silence. "Miss Nakamura," the nurse called from within. Yuki stepped past the board. The editorial's letters were crisp enough to sting, but the captain's notice steadied beside it like a ruler along a wavering line. Inside, the room smelled of carbolic again. On the tray, wire frames glinted, simple and small. The pupil lamp burned at a polite brightness, as if refusing to be loud. "Right on time," the nurse said. "We will fit today." Yuki exhaled. The tension did not leave. It redistributed, thinner, like a weight carried by two hands instead of one. She took her place at the chair. Beyond the screen, the Snellen chart waited, unchanged by headlines. The door clicked shut. Outside, voices went to paper. Inside, she lifted her chin, and the work continued. Sun pooled at the threshold like warm syrup, but the infirmary kept its cooler weather, carbolic and cotton, fan blades whirring the air. On the side table, a towel bore a neat row of wire frames, each pair tagged with a number that matched a card. The pupil lamp burned low, a courteous star. From a corridor angle, the Snellen chart showed its hard alphabet, ready to test whatever they put on her face. "Miss Nakamura," the nurse said, "sign and fit." Yuki took the stub pencil. Her hand did not shake, though she felt the attention of 3 people: a guard at the jam, the nurse, and Hana from her barracks, who had been issued a pair and now held them as if they might bite. "They will know you said yes," Hana whispered, not unkind. "I cannot." She set her frames down, as if returning a borrowed voice. Yuki signed. The ledger accepted her name without comment, the sound of graphite on paper dry and decisive. The nurse selected a pair from the towel, thin metal, nose pads like small petals, and set them on Yuki's face. Coolness kissed her temples. The world leapt forward a notch, and then steadied, edges assembling like troops called to a line. "We'll adjust the temples," the nurse said, levering the earpieces with a small pliers. The pupil lamp brightened a breath. "Look there." Yuki faced the Snellen chart. The letters held their ground. "Third line," the nurse prompted, and Yuki read it without reaching. A laugh rose, but she kept it behind her teeth this time, letting it warm her chest instead of the room. "Pressure points?" Captain Reed asked, stepping in. "Barely here," she said, touching the hinge. He nodded. "We can ease that." Hana hovered, torn by something larger than frames. Yuki lifted the arms slightly and then lowered them again, as if greeting a new tool. "I will use them," she said softly, to Hana, but also to herself. "For letters, for work." The nurse logged the serial against Yuki's number. Non-fraternization printed on the doorframe looked less like a warning and more like a border the clinic kept to protect the small order within. Outside, a breeze scuffed gravel. Inside, metal met skin, and nothing sharp broke. Yuki turned once more to the Snellen chart. The strokes were exact, no haze between them. The tray of wire frames winked. The pupil lamp dimmed, polite again. When she stepped into the hallway, the guard glanced at the glasses, then passed her to the next card in line. Yuki tucked her ledger copy into her pocket and walked toward the yard, the edges of the world keeping time with her feet. The packing shed exhaled burlap and flour dust. Needles winked in a tin cup, and a chalk line ran the length of the table like a quiet command. Yuki took a seat where light fell through a high window and set her ledger slip in the corner, its printed numbers suddenly tidy as fence posts. She lifted her hand to check the set of her wire frames. The nose pads rested where they should, cool and precise. "Keep a steady pace," the guard said from the doorway. "No showing off." She nodded without looking up. The caution lodged in the room like a tack underfoot. Across from her, a woman rubbed her temples, squinting at a frayed hem. Yuki picked up a needle. The hole was no longer a guess, but a small, definite door. She drew the thread through it in one smooth pass and felt a click of relief, like a latch finding home. The first sack seam closed under her hands. Stitch, pull, tie. Each movement measured. She thought of the pupil lamp in the clinic, that warm coin of certainty, and let the remembered steadiness guide her fingers. When she shifted to labels, the stencil's letters lay crisp on cratewood. She read the order slip without pausing on the tiny type that used to blur into fog. The world's edges kept time with her breath. "Faster today," someone muttered, not quite praise. Yuki set the needle aside and blotted the ink on a shipping tag. The outline of the letters stayed where she left it. She did not speed up in answer to the mutter. She simply did not slow down. The Snellen chart floated in memory, a gate she had walked through. And now every label felt like walking further from that doorway, not away from others, but toward a place where things held. At the hour, Mark the supervisor tallied output in a narrow log. "Improved," he said to no one in particular, pencil scratching. The guard glanced over, found nothing to correct, and let the door swing half closed. Yuki flexed her hand and started another seam. The burlap rasped like low surf. Once, she lifted the edge of her wire frames to press a finger to the hinge and then let them settle again. The shed blurred and sharpened, as if agreeing that she belonged to both states, inside the fence and inside the work. When the bell clanged, she stacked the finished sacks, wiped the table free of dust, and signed the hour log. Her name landed evenly on the line. No flourish, no apology, just the fact of it, clear. Mail day thinned the room's noise to a purposeful hush. Paper rationed to single sheets lay in a stack beside a bottle of ink and a square of blotting paper freckled with old violets. Yuki waited her turn at the table, feeling the new certainty at the bridge of her nose where the wire frames rested. Across the room, the censor's desk thumped at intervals. Stamp, lift, stamp, purple circles blooming on envelopes like evening flowers. Sumi hovered near her shoulder. "Careful what you write," she said. "They read gratitude as a bow." "I know," Yuki answered, not looking up. The pen felt heavier than before. Or perhaps it was simply that it now had edges her hand could respect. She dipped, let the nib breathe, and began with the preface everyone used. Health, weather, nothing of schedules. The words came straight, not wandering into the margins. She paused, seeing in her mind the Snellen chart, its large E like a gate she had passed through, and beyond it, the remembered warmth of the pupil lamp, not blinding, only steady. Sumi leaned closer. "Do not say thank you. They will say you chose a side." Yuki considered the page. Pride had kept her safe once, like a wall. But walls blocked light as well as danger. She let the pen rest. She thought of the way the burlap fibers separated under a needle now, visible as small roads, of the supervisor's pencil ticking improved, of Hana's hands, hesitant over her own frames. She did not want to make a sermon. She wanted to tell a true fact that would reach her mother without being cut away. She wrote a single line, no more than the room could bear. "Today I saw the world's edges," she added after a breath. "I am well, neutral as bread." Sumi read it with her eyes alone and said nothing. The censor's stamp knocked again, impersonal as rain. Yuki blotted the page. The blotting paper's pattern came up crisp, little starbursts of purple, so clear it startled her. The wire frames cooled against her skin, as if reminding her that sight was a tool, not a pledge. She folded the sheet, slid it into its envelope, and carried it to the desk. The man stamped without pausing on her name. The purple circle flared, dried. Yuki stepped back into the room, letter light in her hand and heavier than it looked. The decision did not ease. It simply held. Outside, late sun leaned across the yard, and the day's edges kept their line. The November air arrived dry and clean, a line of geese stitching the sky beyond the fence. Yuki paused at the clinic threshold where a placard declared, "Medical area. No shouting. No weapons beyond this point." Beneath it, yesterday's notice still lay flat. Appointments proceeding under standing obligations. Inside, the familiar carbolic cooled her breath. The pupil lamp glowed a small, obedient sun. The Snellen chart held its black alphabet. The big E, steady as a gate she now knew by touch. The contractor in the sun-faded cap lingered by the door jamb. "All this for prisoners," he said to no one in particular, each word a pebble aimed at still water. Yuki adjusted the bridge of her wire frames and did not look away. She felt no triumph, only a rightness that did not need to raise its voice. The nurse nodded her toward the stool. Captain Reed stepped in with the ledger and the stub pencil that rasped like a cricket. "We'll verify the fit," he said. "Read when you're ready." The lamp brightened a breath. Yuki's hand twitched, memory tugging at the younger girl who once flinched. She did not need to shield anyone now, but the instinct warmed her fingers. The chart steadied. Reed's tone was the same as it had been on the first day, perhaps softer. "You're safe. It won't hurt." The words echoed the earlier morning and settled differently, less as promise, more as description of the room they had made together. "Third line when you're ready, Miss Nakamura." She read it through, no guessing, no apology, then lowered her hands to her lap. "Doctor," she said, the word careful but not small. "Thank you for doing what is required and for treating it as dignity, not a favor." Something eased in his shoulders that might have been relief. "Policy holds," he said. "Dignity is the point of it." Behind them, paper shifted. The contractor made a sound that hoped to be a scoff and failed. The guard studied the floor, then the sign, and let the hinge settle. Yuki stood. The world's edges kept their line. The hairline crack in the chart's paint, the clean serif on the E, the polished curve of the wire frames where light gathered and moved. She touched the temple once, not to adjust, but to acknowledge. Outside, the bell would call her back to work. Inside, this quiet had its own bell that no one rang. "Try the third line again," Reed said, almost the same words as before, tilted by 1 degree. She did, and the letters answered. When she stepped into the yard, the fence was still a fence. The sky, though, held. She walked toward her hour with the sense that nothing had changed and everything had, which was another way of saying she could see. The first rain of November came thin as thread, darkening the yard to a soft graphite. Yuki stood beneath the eave and lifted her chin into the cool. The fence did not move. It rarely did. But the world beyond it, rows of trees, a sliver of road, a sky with migrating geese stitched across, held more detail than it used to, as if the air had been quietly swept. Inside her barracks, the postcard from home wore the same creases as before, but the loops of her mother's name no longer dissolved at the edges. She read it once, then again, not to understand better, but to honor the clean lines. When she set the card down, the grain of the table met her eyes with the frankness of wood, knots like small storms, scratches like maps to towns no longer there. At the clinic, the Snellen chart remained on its nail, a gate that would keep opening for others. The pupil lamp still threw its gentle coin of light, unromantic and steady. A tray of wire frames waited for the next pair of hands. None of these objects belonged to her, not in the way a keepsake does. They belonged to the room's promise, the quiet insistence that duty might carry a shape that looks, from a distance, like kindness. She did not send another letter to say thank you. She did not need to. She wore the word on her face and used it during the day, to thread a needle without guessing, to read an order slip without fear, to write her name on a ledger line that did not waver. Gratitude was not a bow, she decided. It was a tool, like sight, that you picked up and put down in service of what you meant to do next. When the bell rang for work detail, she stepped into the rain. The drops softened the dust and made the ground smell briefly like earth instead of orders. The fence kept its straight posture. The sky, though, it held. And if a bridge could be made of anything, perhaps it began like this: a chart on a wall, a lamp turned low, a pair of wire frames catching a small seam of light as someone said simply, "Next."